This Qur'an I just quoted to you before, chapter 2, verse 256. La ikraha fid deen. There is no force. Don't force anybody. You cannot force them. This idea that the Prophet said to kill somebody who has abandoned his deen, it's a blasphemous statement against the messenger. Because the messenger could not have said anything that is in conflict with divine text. But we were brought up in the very so-called highly cultural Islamic countries to accept that mentality. It is easy to get a sheikh and a scholar to interpret something in such a way that we will go against the divine commandments. And that is why Muslims are slaughtering Muslims. You have in Pakistan, the Sunnis are slaughtering Shias. And the Shias are slaughtering Sunnis. And many of these slaughterings take place in the masjid, which they call house of God. But we know most of the time is devoid of anything to do with God. It's house of culture and community. So this Qur'an is telling you and me, and this is directly to us, that the Prophet was told that there are people who confess that they accept the message that came to you, and they accept the message that came before you, but in spite of that, they still go to human gods. They go to who? Human gods, human lords. You may not be familiar with that, but the Qur'an tells us in chapter 9, this is exactly what the Jews and the Christians used to do. اتخذوا أحبارهم وَرُهْبَانَهُمْ أَرْبَابًا مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ. They took their religious leaders, their priests and their rabbis, أَرْبَاب مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ. You want to deny that Muslims have not done that? They're doing up to today. That can only happen when people like you and I shirk our responsibility. We don't have time for it. We don't have time for it. We don't have no commitment for it. We are too busy. We have other scales of preference. So when we do that, we are not fortunate to examine the bread by ourselves. We have somebody examining it for us. Because we have reasons and excuses. But the Qur'an is saying to us that if indeed we accept this message that came to the Prophet and the message that came to other prophets from the same Allah, which in essence is the same message, then we should not be going to human gods. We should not be going to human lords. We should go to the book of Allah. Because the messenger only spoke the book of Allah. Only taught the book of Allah. He didn't teach the book of the Arabs. He didn't teach the culture of the Arabs. He didn't teach the culture of the Persians. He didn't teach the culture of Pakistanis and Bangladeshis and Guyanese and Canadians and Americans. He didn't teach that. He taught the deen of Allah. And the Qur'an continues, وَقَدْ أُمِرُوا أَنْ يَكْفُرُوا بِهِ. And everyone who professes to accept the message of the messengers, the last to the first, they were asked to become kuffar with Taghut. We were not asked to swallow the opinion of somebody because the whole world calls him the sheikh, or calls him a khatib, or calls him an imam, or calls him a mufti, or calls him a maulana. A word that we should never even use for people. But who cares in this uneducated society? We use anything. The Qur'an tells you and me. And whatever I'm telling you, you can go to the scholars that perhaps you know, or study the lexicon, or study the lughat, or study the qamus. And this is the logic of a natural sense that you have the ability to comprehend and I do. That Allah is telling us in this verse, chapter 4, verse 60, that if we say we accept the message that the Prophet brought, as the message of Allah, why is it we go to human gods to get opinions and even fatwa that are against divine teachings? This is the challenge for you and me. There's the next one. Maybe you have not heard it. It's called Jibt. And the Qur'an tells us in the same chapter, but verse 51, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا نَصِيبًا مِنَ الْكِتَابِ. Have you not seen the people who have gotten their share of guidance? Every community had a share of guidance. You had a share of guidance. I had a share of guidance. There is none of us can make excuses. Oh, I didn't know the guidance. I didn't go to Islamic university. This Qur'an didn't say anywhere to go to Islamic university. It didn't tell you and me to go to University of Economics or University of Politics or Psychology or anyology. That's our choice. So if you want to understand Qur'an, you can't stay at home and spend 2 minutes and listen to this and that. It doesn't work like that. You've got to make the sacrifice. You've got to make the effort, because anybody who learns any skill has to make the sacrifice and doesn't complain. But we have a lot of lazy people in this Muslim community who found it easy to belong to this club, and this club doesn't require them to prove anything. Because anybody with a Muslim name and a Muslim so-called appearance, they could come into any masjid and any center. That is their certificate of admission. We are not a community who have got to prove our worth by our speech and our deeds. That is why worth and deeds are not the fundamentals of this community here or elsewhere. So the Qur'an tells us in chapter 4 verse 51, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا نَصِيبًا مِنَ الْكِتَابِ. Haven't you seen, O Prophet, those who have been given the guidance? They too had guidance. يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْجِبْتِ وَالطَّاغُوتِ. What is Jibt? What is Jibt? It is full in Pakistan. It is full in Bangladesh. It is full in the Arab world. It is full in Canada. It's full all over. Because guidance is missing, so we got to fill it with something else. Whenever guidance is missing in our lives, we fill the vacuum and the void with something else. And we are very good in doing that. Every society has this concept of ghost. Jibt represents all these ghosts. All these black magic. We even believe that God did magic to beat Pharaoh. This is the sad thing. We believe that Allah did magic to beat Pharaoh. Because we are not students of the Qur'an. We think Pharaoh and his people came with magicians. Because we don't know the language and we don't study, we don't have time. But God does not send messengers as magicians. And God does not fight magic through His messengers with higher magic. It is something for you to think about. Maybe one day I will talk about this. So, the Qur'an says that even though people have been given the guidance of Allah, what do? They still develop Iman with Jibt and Taghut. Jibt means all those perceptions that bring about scare and fear in the lives of people, unfounded, unestablished, non-realistic fears, and you have them in different countries, ghost, bhoot, you have them as demons, you have them that this one has been possessed by a jinn, or possessed by the devil, or possessed by something. It's all over the world. This one knows the future. And you could go in the Muslim countries, in the so-called Muslim countries, in the public. There's no shame. In the public, and find a lot of people. I can read your future. And you and I are so very cool mentally. Oh yes, I want to hear some good news. And you give the man a rupee or 5, I don't know what's the rate now. And you give the man a rupee or a 5 rupee and he says, oh boy, I see a bright future for you. He tells you, you said, thank you very much. Here's an extra.